They said no one survives that kind of fire, especially not when you run straight into it. But I did. For my son. I got this scar saving his life when he was just 8 years old. The blaze had already swallowed half the living room by the time I got to him. Smoke thick as tar, flames dancing across the ceiling, and a sound, God, that sound, of glass shattering and wood groaning as the house gave way. But I didn't think about dying. I thought about getting to him. Because I was the only one who could. He was trapped, cornered near the back room, coughing, eyes wide with terror. "Mom, don't leave me," he screamed. And I didn't. I wrapped him in a blanket, shielded him with my own body, and carried him out through the flames. Even as the fire seared through my skin, even as I felt my flesh tear and burn, I held on. The scar it left stretches down the right side of my face, through my cheek and just above my jawline. It healed. But not in the way people like to see, not in the way that lets you fade back into the crowd. People look twice. Some look away. But I never hid it. Because every time I saw it in the mirror, I remembered why it was there. I remembered that I had done something only a mother would. I paid for his life with a piece of my own. I raised that boy with hands that were always busy, packing lunches, fixing socks, wiping tears. I cheered from the sidelines, clapped at every school concert, stayed up late editing his essays, and worked night shifts just so he could go on school trips without feeling less than the others. So when he called to say he was getting married, I cried. Not because I felt old or forgotten, but because I was proud. Because I thought, I made it. I thought I'd finally get to stand beside him in front of the world and watch him begin a new chapter. With me right there, as I always had been. But on his wedding day, as the photographer arranged everyone into position, adjusting dresses, nudging shoulders, telling people to smile, I stepped forward, waiting for him to wave me in. He looked at me, and then he said it. Loud enough for the photographer, the bridal party, and the guests to hear. "Can you just sit this one out? It's the scar. It'll ruin the photo." That's what he said. The air didn't move. No one spoke. My mouth went dry. I remember standing there with my hands clasped in front of me like I was holding something fragile, like if I let go, I might shatter right there in front of them. So I turned around. I didn't say a word. I walked out of the venue step by step, down the marble aisle I helped pay for. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel for what felt like a lifetime. And then 30 minutes later my phone buzzed. Once. Then again. Then again. 24 missed calls. From numbers I knew and names I never expected. But I didn't answer. Not yet. If this is your first time coming across one of our stories, welcome. Please hit the like button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't scroll away, because what happened next no one saw coming. I was 23 when I gave birth to Jacob. His father had already packed up and left by the second trimester. Said he wasn't ready to be a dad. Said he needed time to find himself. I never chased him down. I figured any man who could abandon his child before they were even born didn't deserve the privilege of raising one. I was a full-time nursing student when Jacob came into the world. I had no savings, no steady job, and no blueprint for what being a single mother would look like. But I had hands that could work and a heart that knew how to stretch love across an entire childhood. I worked 2 jobs. Mornings at the clinic, nights at the diner. There were weeks I only slept 4 hours a night, and months where I rotated 3 uniforms without complaint. Jacob never knew how little we had. I made sure of it. On his birthdays, he got homemade cakes and secondhand toys I wrapped in newspaper comics. On Christmas, he'd find a stocking full of dollar store trinkets I collected for weeks. But he never noticed the price tag, just the love. He was a good kid. Kind. Curious. Always asking questions about the world, about how airplanes stayed in the sky or why the stars didn't fall. He never left my side for long. And if he did, he always came back with a drawing or a story he wanted to tell me. We built a life out of close hugs, whispered prayers, and late-night ramen noodles. Every inch of that boy was raised with purpose. Every step he took, I laid the ground for. And then one afternoon, everything almost vanished. Jacob was 8. We'd just gotten home from school. I was in the kitchen boiling pasta, and he was in the living room watching cartoons. I stepped outside for 2 minutes to grab the mail. That's all it took. The old space heater in the corner of the living room sparked, caught on a frayed curtain, and within seconds smoke poured out of the windows. I dropped everything and ran in barefoot. The heat hit me like a wall, thick and choking. I couldn't see a thing. I screamed his name over and over, until I heard the faintest cough. He was curled beneath the coffee table, crying. I didn't think. I didn't weigh the risk. I just crawled toward him, shielding his body with mine. The fire licked the side of my face as I pulled us both out through the broken front window. I remember lying on the lawn, holding him to my chest as the neighbors screamed for help. The paramedics later told me I had second-degree burns across my face and shoulder. I didn't care. I was breathing. He was alive. That was all I needed. The scar was just part of the price. After the fire, Jacob had nightmares for months. He'd wake up screaming, eyes wide and sweaty, asking if I was still alive. And every single night, I'd crawl into his bed and whisper, "I'm right here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." That incident bonded us in a way most people couldn't understand. We weren't just mother and son. We were survivors. He was my reason for everything. And I was his constant. As he got older, I worked harder, picked up extra shifts at the hospital, gave up dating entirely. I didn't want anyone stepping into Jacob's life and confusing things. I wasn't looking for a partner. I was building a man. I showed up to every spelling bee, every science fair, every baseball game with a cooler of Gatorade and my scar proudly uncovered. To me, it was a symbol of what a mother's love could withstand. But not everyone saw it that way. My sister Lauren, she never approved of how close we were. Lauren was sharp-tongued, always impeccably dressed, and carried opinions like weapons. She didn't have kids of her own and never understood why I sacrificed so much for Jacob. "Don't you think you're smothering him?" she'd ask. "Let the boy breathe. Let him grow up." I'd nod politely, but inside I'd bite back. She didn't see the long nights, the hospital bills, the missed meals so he could have seconds. She didn't feel the guilt of being both mother and father, of never having enough hands for all the tasks love demanded. Jacob was my world. And I made no apologies for that. But as the years went by, I started to feel him drift. It was subtle at first. Phone calls cut short, visits spaced farther apart. He still said he loved me, still hugged me with both arms, but something in his eyes began to shift, like I reminded him of a version of himself he was trying to outgrow. I told myself it was just part of growing up, that every child eventually pulls away. But I also knew the distance wasn't just about age. Someone was pulling him further. And I was about to find out just how far he was willing to go to leave me behind. He left for college in the fall. I remember standing by the dorm door, clutching a bag of groceries he didn't ask for, watching him glance at his phone more than he looked at me. He gave me a quick hug, the kind people give out of obligation, not instinct. When I drove off, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting he'd wave or call me back to say something he'd forgotten. But he didn't. The calls home came less frequently. First once a week, then every other. Then only when he needed something: textbooks, tuition help, a new laptop. I never hesitated. I figured he was busy figuring himself out. It was during his sophomore year that he mentioned her for the first time. Brittany. He said her name like it had weight, like I was supposed to know who she was just by the way he said it. I asked a few questions: where they met, what she was studying, if she made him happy. His answers were short, almost rehearsed, like he was trying to keep me at arm's length. "She's classy," he said once. "Comes from a really good family." I didn't know what that meant, not really. But the way he said it made me feel like whatever family we were wasn't enough. I finally met her at Thanksgiving. She walked into my house wearing white suede boots and a coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. She glanced at the scar on my face like it was an object that didn't belong in the room. She didn't flinch or look shocked, just mildly inconvenienced, like seeing dust on a white couch. She brought a bottle of wine with a label I couldn't pronounce and asked if I had a decanter. I told her we had a pitcher. She declined. Jacob sat beside her at dinner but never looked at me. He laughed at her stories, nodded when she critiqued the seasoning and the stuffing, and didn't say a word when she asked why I hadn't considered doing something about the mark. She said it so casually too, like she was commenting on a chipped nail or a wrinkle in a shirt. I swallowed hard and smiled. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't want Jacob to feel embarrassed. Later that night, I asked him privately why he didn't say anything. He just looked away and said, "She didn't mean anything by it." She just has high standards. That was the moment I felt it for the first time. An invisible wedge driven between us, subtle but firm. After that holiday, things began to shift. Whenever they posted photos online, I was never in them. Even when I had been there, at the birthday dinner at his graduation ceremony, my face was either cropped out or not pictured at all. The captions read things like "Just Us" or "Our Little World." Even though I had driven 3 hours to get there, brought a cake and ironed his shirt while he was in the shower. Once I commented on one of their photos, just a heart emoji. It was deleted within minutes. I didn't ask why. I already knew. He started calling me by my first name in front of her. The first time he did it, I thought I'd misheard. The second time I knew better. He told people Brittany's family had adopted him, that they treated him like their own. He bragged about their vacations, their family yacht, how they threw elaborate Christmas parties where everyone wore coordinated colors. I was still sending him grocery money, still covering gaps in his rent. But he never mentioned me when he talked about the people who shaped him. One day I got a message from Lauren. She sent me a screenshot of Brittany's Instagram. There it was, Jacob on one knee, holding a ring, with Brittany's perfectly manicured hand over her mouth. The caption read, "He asked." I said yes. #Brittinja forever. I stared at that image for a long time. Not because I was shocked, but because I hadn't heard it from him. My son had proposed and I had to find out like a stranger. Like a follower, not a mother. I waited 2 days. He finally called. Said he meant to tell me. Said it just happened fast. Said he didn't want to make a big deal. He invited me to a dinner with Brittany's parents. I said yes, even though I knew they didn't want me there. When I arrived, Brittany's mother greeted me with a practiced smile. Her pearls looked like they belonged in a museum case, and her perfume hit me before her words did. She called me dear, offered me sparkling water, and complimented my strength for raising Jacob, all by yourself. Bless your heart. The word bless had never sounded so insulting. During dinner, she spoke about legacy, about appearances, about the importance of presentation and image. She said things like aesthetic harmony and unified public face. Then she looked directly at me and asked if I had ever considered reconstructive options. I didn't answer. I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside my plate, and excused myself to the restroom. I didn't cry. I just stared at myself in the mirror. The scar was still there. Still mine. Still part of the story she would never understand. When I came back, Jacob was laughing with her father about something I hadn't heard. He barely noticed I'd been gone, and just like that, I understood. I was no longer part of the picture he was building. I was a shadow in a frame he wanted to erase. The wedding plans started without me. I found out about the venue from a cousin who saw it online. I learned the date from a Facebook post that Brittany's maid of honor shared, captioned with balloons and hashtags and glittering countdowns. There was no phone call. No personal message. Just an envelope that arrived in the mail one Friday afternoon, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a bank statement. It wasn't addressed to mom or mother of the groom. Just my full name, typed. No return address. Inside was a cream-colored invitation with gold foil edges. The kind you'd send to a distant coworker or a long-lost acquaintance. It read, "You are cordially invited to the union of Brittany Lee Harrison and Jacob Daniel Cooper." No handwritten note. No message from him. Just a line at the bottom. Formal attire. Champagne theme. Adults only. I held that invitation in my hands and read it over and over, as if more would appear the longer I stared. But the emptiness was loud. When I called Jacob to ask about the details, where to stay, if they'd need help with anything, he answered with a clipped, "Hey," followed by long pauses, like each question was an inconvenience. I told him I'd gotten the invitation. He said, "Yeah, Brittany's mom handled most of that." Most. Not all. Meaning he saw it. Approved it. Sent it. I asked if there was anything I could do. If he wanted me to bring anything special, help with the rehearsal dinner, maybe wear a certain color. He replied, "No need. Just show up. Be on time." And then he said it, casually like he was discussing the weather. "Oh, and Brittany's mom wants the photos to be clean. Just neutral tones, nothing too bold. She's big on symmetry." I didn't need a translation. I understood exactly what that meant. The next time I saw him was at a suit fitting for the groomsmen. I had stopped by to drop off a gift I'd found months earlier, a vintage compass I'd had engraved. Wherever life takes you, always remember who helped you chart the course. He barely looked at it, just nodded and said, "Cool." Then he introduced me to one of Brittany's cousins. This is Evelyn. Not Mom. Not my mom. Just Evelyn. The cousin smiled politely, but the moment caught in my throat like dry bread. When we were alone, I asked him gently why he hadn't called me Mom. He shrugged. It's just more professional. Brittany's family's very formal. I wanted to ask when our relationship became a business arrangement. When love had to be filtered through etiquette. But I didn't. I just nodded. Back home, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the pile of memories we'd built. Photo albums, finger paintings, report cards I'd saved from kindergarten. I looked at the handprint in plaster he'd made me when he was 5. It had his name scratched into it, uneven and crooked. On the back it said, "To Mommy, you're my favorite person." I used to keep that on my dresser. I moved it to a drawer that night. I thought about skipping the wedding. I thought about saving myself the humiliation of being ushered to the back row like a guest who just happened to share a last name. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't not show up. Because no matter how far he'd wandered, no matter what Brittany's mother whispered behind closed doors, or what themes were chosen for photographs, he was still my son. And I had spent my whole life showing up for him. At school plays, emergency rooms, parking lots at 2 a.m., and courthouse steps. In tears and laughter, in moments too messy for cameras. I wasn't going to stop now, even if he wanted me to. So I picked out a dress. Simple. Modest. Ivory, not white. A soft fabric that didn't cling. I pulled my hair back, wore the locket he gave me when he was 11, and left the scar uncovered, because I wasn't going to erase the story of how we got there just to fit into someone else's version of perfect. I told myself I'd smile. I'd be quiet. I'd take my seat and clap at the right moments. But nothing prepared me for what he said when it came time for the family photos. The wedding day was warm, with just enough breeze to make the expensive white linens flutter like flags on a battlefield I hadn't realized I was entering. I arrived 10 minutes early, just like the invitation instructed. No one greeted me. There was no usher to guide me, no program handed over with a smile. I found my seat near the back, next to an empty chair, and sat down quietly, folding my hands over my purse like I was waiting for a verdict. Around me, people chatted in soft tones. Women in polished dresses compared designer heels. Men talked business and golf scores and destination honeymoons. I recognized no one. Some glanced at me, then looked away just as quickly, as if unsure whether I belonged or perhaps wishing I didn't. The bridesmaids passed by in a blur of blush chiffon and careful curls. One of them noticed me and whispered something to the girl beside her. They both laughed. Not cruelly, just carelessly. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd learned long ago how to understand silence. When the ceremony began, everyone stood. Brittany walked down the aisle like she was floating. Every step choreographed. Every glance downcast like a princess pretending to be shy. The guests sighed at the sight of her. I watched Jacob. He looked nervous, a little stiff, the way someone might when everything around them feels fragile. He didn't look back at me. Not once. When they said their vows, I saw him smile in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy holding up his first spelling test with a gold star on top. It broke something small in me, not because he was happy, but because I realized how far I stood from that happiness. The ceremony ended. Applause followed. They kissed. The crowd rose to take photos and throw petals and capture 1,000 angles of a moment that felt too perfect to be real. I stayed seated. Afterward, as everyone gathered for cocktails, the photographer began arranging people for formal portraits. There were shouts of names, rearranged chairs, laughter in clusters. Someone called for the parents. Brittany's family moved together like one polished unit. Her father in a gray suit, her mother in a pale rose gown that sparkled without trying. I stood, smoothing my dress. I waited. Surely someone would notice I hadn't been called. And then I saw Jacob, walking toward me. He didn't rush. His expression was composed, tight around the mouth, eyes careful not to betray emotion. He glanced around, then leaned in close. "Mom, can you sit this one out?" He didn't pause, didn't soften it. It's your scar, you know? Brittany's mom's already upset. The words came out clean, as if he'd rehearsed them. As if this conversation had already happened behind closed doors, and now he was just here to deliver the final line. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, I saw a man who had folded himself so small to fit inside someone else's version of success that there was no room left for the woman who'd raised him. He said it like I was a stain, like I was ruining the illusion, like I was the thread that might unravel the whole fabric if someone looked too closely. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because there was nothing else to do. I smiled faintly. It was the kind of smile you wear when you're bleeding under your clothes and no one notices. Then I turned and walked away. No scene. No tears. Just steps. Quiet ones. Each one carrying the weight of birthdays remembered, fevers nursed, scraped knees kissed, and lullabies hummed in the dark. I passed the reception tent. The laughter, the lights strung like stars across the canopy. I kept walking until I reached my car. I sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead. I didn't start the engine. Didn't turn on the radio. Didn't cry. I just sat there, my hands resting on my lap, the scar on my cheek catching the light of a day I would never forget. And then one by one, the calls started coming in. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I just sat there. In my car. Still dressed in my navy blue dress with lace at the cuffs. My hands resting on my thighs, palms down, as if grounding myself in a moment that refused to let me breathe. The sounds of the wedding had faded into background noise. Distant laughter. Music rising and falling like waves too far out at sea to touch me. The occasional clink of glasses, muffled by the closed car windows. Inside the car, there was only silence. And the faint tick of the clock on the dashboard. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I adjusted the rearview mirror. Not to check the road, but to look at myself. The scar curved from the edge of my left eye down to the corner of my jaw. A reminder. Not of pain, but of purpose. I got that scar pulling Jacob out of a burning house when he was just 8 years old. I remembered the way the flames danced across the hallway. How I'd wrapped him in a blanket, shielding him with my body. The crackling ceiling, the thick smoke, the splinters digging into my knees as I crawled on all fours. I remembered the moment he looked at me afterward, his small face streaked with ash and tears, and whispered, "You saved me, Mommy." And I had. In every way. But today he had buried me. Not in soil, not with a gravestone, but in absence. In denial. In that one sentence that cut deeper than any flame ever could. I started the engine, the soft hum breaking the silence. Pulled out of the lot slow and careful, like I was afraid something inside me might fall apart if I moved too fast. The road stretched ahead, empty, the sun beginning to lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. And the memories came one after another without mercy. Jacob at 5, refusing to go to bed without one more story. Jacob at 10, proudly pinning his Student of the Month badge to my scrubs before I left for a night shift. Jacob at 12 whispering through tears, "Don't worry, Mom. One day I'll take care of you." Jacob at 16 hugging me in the hospital parking lot after my long shift, saying, "You're my hero." That boy was gone, replaced by a man who couldn't bear to have his mother ruin a photograph. I gripped the wheel tighter, and then I whispered it, barely loud enough to hear myself. I died for him that day, not in the fire, but in the way he erased me. The phone buzzed. Once. Then again. A sharp vibration that pulled me from the spiral I hadn't realized I was slipping into. I glanced at the screen. 24 missed calls. My heart thudded. I pulled over, parking beside a quiet patch of trees off the road. Thumb hovered over the notifications. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize. A few from cousins. One from a former coworker who I hadn't spoken to in years. And then Lauren, my sister. For missed calls from her alone. I hesitated. She hadn't come to the wedding. Said she couldn't stomach the way Jacob treated me. Said she'd rather visit a beach than watch her own nephew perform a live disownment. I tapped on her name, hit call back. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice shook, breathless and urgent. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I've been calling. Everyone's been calling." I blinked, confused. "Why?" There was a beat of silence. Then she said low and fast, Something happened. After you left, I sat up straighter. What do you mean? More buzzing. More texts popping up. Lauren's voice came again, firmer this time. You need to come back. Now. And just like that, the silence shattered. Lauren's voice still rang in my ears as I drove back, fast but careful. My fingers trembled on the wheel. I didn't know what I was heading into, but something deep in my gut told me it wasn't just family gossip or some drunken scuffle. Something had cracked wide open. By the time I pulled up near the reception hall again, the music was still playing, but it didn't carry the same festive energy. It sounded hollow, like a party clinging to the edge of collapse. I didn't get out of the car right away. I watched. Guests were trickling out, some in small groups, whispering, others with tense, unreadable expressions. A few looked back toward the building like they'd witnessed something they weren't quite ready to process. I slowly stepped out and walked toward the back entrance. No one stopped me. No one even looked at me directly. When I pushed open the side door, the air hit me like a wall, heavy with discomfort. Not celebration. Not joy. The vibe had soured into something sharp and shameful. I slipped in quietly, unnoticed, and stood near one of the pillars. What I saw from that distance made my chest tighten. My cousin Jasmine was standing in the center of the room, arms crossed, chin up, not backing down. She saved his life, she shouted. She ran into a fire to save Jacob when he was 8. Do y'all know that? Huh. The room was frozen. The DJ had turned down the music. A few waitstaff had stopped in their tracks, halfway to the tables. She didn't miss a football game growing up. She didn't miss a parent-teacher conference. She didn't date. She didn't sleep. She worked double shifts in an ER just to give him this life. And this is what she gets. A disinvite from a family photo because of a scar. Someone near the dessert table muttered, "Wait, what?" She didn't leave on her own, Jasmine said, her voice rising, trembling now. She left because Jacob asked her to. Whispered it like she was some embarrassment. Like she was dirt on his shoe. People gasped. Some guests looked around uncomfortably. Others began standing. One woman shook her head and grabbed her clutch. A man beside her, maybe her husband, leaned down and whispered something before they both walked out. I saw Aunt Cecily rise slowly and follow behind them. Then more. A few of Jacob's childhood teachers, who I hadn't even known were invited, stood and walked toward the door. Every step they took felt like justice cutting through silk. In the middle of the room, Brittany's father stood beside his daughter, face red with a fury that even the champagne couldn't hide. "You've embarrassed us all," he snapped at Jacob, loud enough for half the room to hear. "You made a scene. You humiliated your own mother at our event. This was supposed to be tasteful, elegant." Brittany glanced around, visibly shrinking under the growing attention. Her father's voice was like a judge delivering a sentence. "She should have never been invited if you were going to treat her like that." Jacob opened his mouth, but nothing came out. A soft murmur buzzed through the room, like everyone was waking up at once from the same uncomfortable dream. I could feel the shift in the air. It was no longer just about me. It was about what had been done publicly, deliberately, and who had allowed it. Lauren appeared at my side. I hadn't even noticed her enter. "You needed to see this," she whispered. I nodded once. Quietly. From across the room Jacob saw me. His face ash white. For a moment I saw my boy again, not the man who had shunned me, but the boy who once sat on the edge of my hospital bed, holding my hand and crying because he thought I wouldn't wake up after surgery. His lips parted. He took a step forward. But I didn't move. Because this wasn't a moment for him to fix with a hug, or an apology whispered through tears. This was the unraveling. He had built a beautiful tower on top of all my sacrifices. He'd stood at the altar, and thanked everyone except the one person who had clawed their way through flames to give him breath. And now, that tower was crumbling, in front of his bride, her family, and every guest they had tried so hard to impress. Brittany's makeup had smudged beneath her eyes. She wasn't crying. She was seething. I could tell. This wasn't the fairy tale wedding she'd imagined. It had been interrupted, not by me, but by truth. People were still leaving. Others stayed, watching like spectators at a slow-motion accident they couldn't look away from. Jacob turned to Jasmine. "How dare you do this on my wedding day?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "How dare you?" she said. "You think this is about a photo?" "No, Jacob. This is about who you've become. He looked around as if seeking someone to defend him, but no one spoke. And in that moment he looked alone. Truly painfully alone. I didn't stay. I turned around and walked back out the way I came. The sound of my heels echoing down the hallway. Each step lighter than the last. Because for the first time in years I didn't feel like I owed him anything. I remember the first time I met Brittany's mother alone. It was at a cafe downtown. She'd asked me to join her for lunch. A quiet place, white tablecloths, and conversations held in polite tones. I was hopeful. Maybe she wanted to connect, build a bridge. Be family. She didn't waste time. After the waiter walked away with our orders, she leaned in, her perfume thick like her smile. "We're all so proud of Jacob," she said, swirling her wine glass. "He's worked so hard to rise above, well, everything." I nodded, thinking she meant his childhood struggles, the fire, the long hospital stays, the therapy me. But then she looked me dead in the eye and said, "We just want the wedding to be perfect. No distractions on the day. Jacob understands." I smiled politely, but inside my lungs froze. Distractions. She meant me. She didn't say the word scar, but it clung to her tone like a parasite. That entire conversation wasn't about inclusion. It was a preamble to erasure. And she was making it clear. I was not part of the new narrative. I was the uncomfortable chapter they wanted to skip. I never told anyone about that meeting. Not Lauren. Not Jasmine. I kept it locked inside, where shame curls up and pretends to be silence. But now I'll tell you what I never said out loud, what I found out 6 weeks before the wedding. I'd received an envelope in the mail. A thick one, no return address, just my name printed in that cold, clinical font lawyers use. I opened it slowly, seated at the kitchen table where Jacob once did his homework. Inside was a draft of a prenup. My name was mentioned, boldly, explicitly. A clause. One that stated that in the unlikely event of Jacob's death, no part of his estate or any shared marital assets would be distributed to me. Not even through a trust. Not through the house. Not through future grandchildren. Nothing. Buried in legal jargon was one undeniable message. Cut her off. Permanently. It was Brittany's request. Her signature was already on it. Jacob's signature wasn't there yet. But a note was attached. "Mom, don't worry. It's just paperwork. It won't change anything between us." But it had already changed everything. That clause wasn't just a formality. It was a warning. A line drawn in ink and blood. You no longer exist in the world we're building. They didn't ask me to sign anything. They just expected I'd go quietly. But I didn't. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat at the same kitchen table, poured a glass of water with shaking hands, and pulled out my own will from the file drawer. And I rewrote every word. No longer would everything go to Jacob by default. I named Lauren as my executor. I listed Jasmine, her kids, and a few charities I cared about. I even added a scholarship fund for burn victims in underfunded communities. I did all of it in one sitting. Met with a notary the next morning. Filed it. Sealed it. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want it to be a threat. I wanted it to be a mirror. If they ever looked back, I wanted them to see the reflection of what they'd thrown away. The love. The loyalty. The years. Because I may have walked away from that wedding in silence, but I didn't walk away powerless. And the truth? I never died in that fire. But something inside me had been buried alive ever since. The girl who believed love could fix everything. The mother who thought her sacrifice would be enough. The woman who waited year after year to be seen. That woman was gone. What rose in her place was someone no longer waiting for a seat at their table. I was building my own. I need you to breathe. I wasn't ready for that twist either. If your heart just dropped, tap the like button. It tells me I'm not the only one who felt it. And don't keep this story to yourself. Share it with someone who loves real-life drama as much as you do, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. I saw his name flash across my screen 3 times that night. Then 6. Then 12. By the next morning, there were over 20 missed calls from Jacob alone. His number, Brittany's. A couple of unknowns I assumed were his friends or maybe her family, trying to mend a mess that had already cracked wide open. I didn't answer a single one. Not because I didn't want to. Not because I didn't ache to hear his voice, maybe an apology, maybe just an explanation. But because I knew whatever he said, it wouldn't take back what he did. Some things don't rewind. Some wounds, no matter how sorry you are, just keep bleeding under the surface. So I turned my phone face down and let the silence settle like dust on old memories. That afternoon, Lauren showed up at my door. She didn't knock softly. She pounded like only a sister can, angry, tender, full of questions, but more full of love. I opened the door and she didn't even wait for me to invite her in. She wrapped her arms around me, held on for a moment too long, and whispered, "What you did was the most dignified exit I've ever seen." And that's when the tears came. Because I hadn't felt dignified. I felt discarded. But hearing it from her made something loosen in my chest, like maybe walking away wasn't weakness. Maybe walking away was the strongest thing I'd ever done. We sat on the couch with mugs of lukewarm tea, talking in pieces, not needing to fill every silence. She told me what happened after I left. The chaos, the confrontation, the questions flying across the reception like loose glitter and shame. She said people cried. Some left. Brittany's mother tried to smooth things over by saying it was all a misunderstanding, but nobody believed her. Lauren didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't need to. Instead, she pulled a small folded envelope from her purse and said, "Just in case you need to write something down." That night, I opened it. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with a faint floral border like the kind people use for wedding vows or eulogies. I sat at my desk, stared at the blank page for what felt like hours. Then I started to write. "Dear Jacob," it began. And then everything poured out. How I remembered the tiny shoes he wore on his first day of school, how his fingers gripped mine like the world would swallow him whole if I let go. How I used to whisper stories in his ear when the nightmares came, stories about heroes with burn marks who were still brave. How I knew I'd never be enough for Brittany, but I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd still be enough for him. I wrote about the fire, the pain, the surgeries, the endless nights praying he'd survive. I wrote about the necklace he gave me on my 40th birthday, a little gold heart with Mom, my hero carved inside in tiny boyish script. I never took it off. Not once. Not even when they cut into my skin. I wrote about the silence, about the way he stopped calling me Mom, about the way he said, "Your scar," like it was the only part of me that mattered. I ended with, "I would have burned 1,000 times over just to keep you whole. But I can't keep setting myself on fire to warm people who walk away when the smoke clears." I folded the letter gently, placed it in the drawer next to my passport, and never sealed the envelope. Some words aren't meant to be sent. They're just meant to be said. Later that week, I found the necklace. It was still in the little velvet box it came in, tucked at the back of my jewelry drawer behind old pins and tangled earrings. The clasp was loose. The chain had dulled. But the inscription was still there. "Mom, my hero." I ran my thumb across the words one last time, then placed it carefully into a donation box I was preparing for the community shelter. They were holding a fundraiser to help women starting over, some of them survivors of violence, some just trying to find a way back to themselves. That necklace no longer belonged to my story. It belonged to someone who still believed in heroes. And maybe, just maybe, someone who still needed one. I closed the box, taped it shut, and placed it by the door. Some goodbyes aren't loud. Some are just letting go. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but because sometimes you have to make space for something better than what you lost. Like peace, like self-respect, like the quiet knowing that you don't have to be invited, wanted, or even remembered to be whole. You just have to be free. The first voicemail came 3 nights later. I hadn't blocked his number. I wanted to, but I couldn't bring myself to erase him that completely. The message was short, hesitant. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Mom, I made a mistake. People are talking. Brittany's furious. But I didn't think it would feel this bad." There was a pause, like he was trying to figure out if that was enough. Then the click of the call ending. Just a boy caught in the wreckage he helped create, finally realizing the smoke doesn't just disappear when you walk away from the fire. I didn't call back. Another voicemail came a week later. More desperate this time. "I shouldn't have listened to her. I knew what you did for me. I just didn't want to make the day about the past. But I see now. I erased the wrong person. Still I said nothing. Silence became my armor. And my answer. Weeks passed. I didn't follow the updates, but Lauren did. She always did. She was the one who told me Brittany had filed for annulment. Less than 2 months, she said, setting her coffee cup down with a dull thud. Turns out your precious daughter-in-law wasn't so loyal after all. The other man was someone Jacob had known. A friend. A betrayal within a betrayal. It was almost poetic. Suddenly, the house Jacob built with Brittany became a shell. His calls became more frequent. Messages grew longer, his voice cracking under the weight of everything he had traded for glitter and appearances. One evening, I watched from the upstairs window as he pulled into my driveway. He sat in his car for a long time. Then he walked up the path hesitant. I saw him reach into his pocket, pull out his key. He tried it. Once. Twice. Then he stood still for a moment, just staring at the door. I could feel the confusion from here. He didn't know yet that I had changed the locks, that the door to his childhood, the one I had kept open long after he'd started slipping away, was no longer his to walk through. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because healing sometimes means closing the door before the wound turns septic. Because forgiveness is not the same as access. He knocked once. I stayed upstairs. He knocked again, louder this time. Still I stayed quiet. He sat on the porch for an hour, scrolling through his phone, then staring at the welcome mat like it might give him an answer. Eventually he left. He didn't come back. Not that week. Not the next. And I didn't chase him. Because my silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of every moment I carried him. Every scar I bore so he could be whole. Every overlooked insult. Every lonely birthday. Every time he edited me out of his life without even asking why that hurt. This wasn't revenge with fire or fury. This was something colder. Quieter. Stronger. The kind of revenge only a mother could carry. Not to punish, but to protect what little she had left of herself. I started gardening again. Strange, how dirt can feel like a resurrection. I planted hydrangeas along the fence, their roots clinging to the earth like they knew what it meant to stay grounded through storms. I repainted the living room, soft sage and ivory, colors that didn't demand attention, just peace. I changed my will again. Not to punish Jacob, but to make sure the right kind of people inherited my story. The quiet warriors. The invisible givers. The women who carry fire in their bones but still walk gently through the world. And one crisp autumn morning, as I sat under the tree Jacob once climbed when he was 5, I whispered something into the wind. I loved you enough to let go. And I let go enough to love myself again. That was the moment I knew. He didn't break me. He freed me. I will always love my son. That's not the part that changed. The part that changed was me. I no longer confused love with permission. I no longer fold myself into smaller versions to fit inside someone else's comfort. I no longer apologize for the space I take up, or the silence I keep. After the door stayed closed and the calls stopped coming, I didn't crumble. I unfolded. Grief no longer dragged me under. It held my hand and walked beside me. We learned each other's names. We made peace. I found a support group. Just a quiet circle of women who knew the ache of children gone cold. Who understood that the deepest cuts don't always bleed. Sometimes they hum low and constant in the chest. A reminder of what was lost. Or never really had. Each woman carried a story like mine. Different details, same core. Mothers who were told they were too much or not enough. Mothers who sacrificed everything and were thanked with distance. We didn't need to fix each other. We just needed to be heard. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I started writing again. Not letters. Not journals. Just words. Honest, untangled thoughts that didn't beg to be understood. Just released. Like birds that had waited too long in cages built from guilt. I donated the last box of wedding memories. The table numbers I helped design. The shawl I bought for the chilly evening reception I never stayed for. The shoes I never danced in. And on a Tuesday morning with the sea calling softly beyond my window, I took a train to the coast. No reason. No big occasion. Just me and the version of myself I hadn't seen in years. I stood barefoot in the sand, let the water rush around my ankles like an apology from the universe. I traced the scar on my arm, the one I got pulling Jacob from that burning car. The skin still tight in places. The memory still sharp. But I didn't cry. I smiled. Because that scar no longer meant pain. It meant survival. It meant proof. It meant I was there. I loved. I fought. I saved. Even when they forgot. Especially then. And as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I whispered. Not to Jacob, not to Brittany, not to anyone else, but to myself. I came back home. To me. I turned away from the waves, sand sticking to my feet, wind in my hair. Lighter. Not because they changed, but because I chose peace over permission. And that was how I took back my power without raising my voice. If this ending gave you chills or left you speechless, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because my next story might just be even wilder. And please, drop a comment below. I read every single one.